folks, and welcome to another day in the Milky Way. And tonight we got a great show for you with my co-host, Hawkeye Two Feathers, David Null. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. We welcome you with the love and the honor of the infinite creator. And we continue to pray that each and every day that each and every one of you will continue to learn how to accept and receive the knowledge, the healing, the wisdom, and the many blessings from the universe. And I'm back again with you, Mr. Robert. This is show 182, right?
That's right, 182. Here we go.
182 shows. It's hard to comprehend.
I know it, isn't it amazing? I can't believe it myself that we made it this far. But
yeah, and anybody that shows up tonight, thank you very much to help us make show 182. At least we'll have an audience. Give us an audience, my friends. And who is that? Sunset Dreamer? Hi there.
Yes. Sunset Dreamer, yes. Well, I've been enjoying, but taking a few days of vacation this week, and Witchy Moon's in the house. Anyway, Elderberry and Chloe's in the house. There you go. Hello, everyone. Anyway, I've been taking a few days off. Like I was telling you before the show, I've been working on my truck. I did a little drone work today. I'm going to post that pretty soon. Flying that around the house, seeing all the beautiful scenery. And I also went for a horse ride. So there you go.
That's good.
Yeah. The funny part is I was riding my horse along and there's nothing out there. And I spooked up a deer that was laying in the tall grass. That was kind of fun to see. Big antlers. It must have been a mule deer. It was all in velvet. It was really cool. I tried to get a picture, but he was quite far away. And then I was coming along. I'm going down the road, and I went over this driveway, and it had really tall weeds. And I looked down, and it looked like there was a garbage bag in the weeds. And I kept on riding, and I turned around. I'm like, I'm going to go back and see what that was. It looked like a garbage bag, but it was bigger. So I went back, and I get up there, and I look down, and I'm like, it's got fur. It's not a bag. And just as I thought about that, it jumps up and runs off. It was probably a 500-pound calf, Black Angus.
Oh, really?
They'd gotten through the fence, and he run off, and I was like, oh boy, I don't know how to get him back in the pen, so I just kind of chased him down the fence line a little bit, and I turned around and I herded him back to where he came from. So obviously he knows where he goes, but I just thought that was kind of funny because you're riding along and all of a sudden there's a cow laying there. Yeah, a cow. Just
you
like
never
that.
know what to expect, right?
That's right. In the woods, you'd expect to see all kinds of things, but here, in the grass and the tall grass, you'd be amazed at what you see. Well, tonight, guys, we're going to be talking about a guy named James Clyman. He was, he did a lot of stuff. Anyway, he went from the Rocky Mountains to a soldier. He was, in the military. He helped Jedediah Smith and Abraham Lincoln. He lived a very long time. He was born in 1792 to 8 or somewhere in there. I think it was February 1st, 1792. He was born. So this guy, he's been all over the place. So we're going to get some really good information from this guy. He's seen the turning of the ages, the mountain men, the trapping he did, and then he came back, and just like most of the rest of the mountain men, he guided trails and worked for the military and the soldiers and was a scout, and he worked his way through. He knew a lot of stuff. bet you he
and
could
he
read
made,
it. You never know.
and he survived the Civil War,
Yes, 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 he did. So he
which
lived.
back in I was watching something today about how many hundreds of thousands of people that were and millions that were killed during the Civil War, and how much that Lincoln thought it was only going to be a skirmish, and
Yeah,
that they'd have to keep Lee on the other side of the Potomac, on the Virginia side of the Potomac, and that would be that. And they scrap a little bit in Congress, and then all hell broke loose. So, but anyway, so yeah, it was amazing how they said how many people they're involved in the Civil War, and despite all the bullets and everything, how many men survived the Civil War. It was like
yeah.
what Anyway, I'm sorry, I get off on a
No, no.
tangent.
Oh, that's so true. Civil War is a big deal. I forget how many hundreds of thousands of people died. I think it was 350,000 people might have died. I don't know, but the bad part was that they're all fighting, like their neighbors, in a small area. Remember, the eastern side of the Mississippi was really packed with people. They hadn't really moved west of the Mississippi at that point in time. Even though we had the 49ers and all of that and the Oregon Trail, that was just a small cup of beans moving into those areas. It wasn't until the 1860s that people really started heading out west. The Civil War created a demand for that buffalo hide for the industrial machine. They used them as belts for the the machines, and they used the leather for the boots for the soldiers, and they use that leather for everything. You know what I'm saying? Because it was good and it was durable.
They used the leather for belting
Yes,
because
belt.
everything back in the day was belt driven. Well, things are still belt driven, to
Yep.
this day. Your fan belt and things like that in your automobile. But so they had to have belting another, because they had steam engines that would run the factory. And I know this because in Pelham, Georgia, there's a machine shop there that still has all the workings in the ceiling. And so all they had to do was shove that steam engine into gear, and
Mm.
it would start running everything in the shop. All of the everything, all the pulleys in the ceiling would start running. So if you
Yep.
wanted to run a particular machine, you just got underneath it and engaged the pulley. But so with the buffalo hides and all that, they absolutely needed those for the belting because rubber really wasn't a thing yet.
Did you ever see a shop like that working?
Oh yeah, it's amazing. Because
Yes.
that one
No.
over in Pelham. Now I haven't been over there in a couple of years, but the last time I was over there, I asked the guy. Now the steam engine they don't have; it's an electric motor, but still everything in the ceiling still works, and all of the tools still work. And the guy
Mhm.
said it would be too much trouble to buy an electric motor for every one of his machines. It was still just as easy to run it off of the belting and off of the ceiling. So yeah,
No,
buddy.
yeah. When I lived back in Wisconsin, I would go to the Amish, and when you'd go there, that's how they did it. They would have a big shop, and the motor outside, whichever it was, a gas or diesel or whatever they had, would run the belt-driven pulley system, and it would be in the top of the middle of the shop, and all the machines would be in the middle there, and they would run everything that way. And they would have all kinds of little gizmos. I went to the cabinet maker guy and pick up some stuff, and then I went over to another guy with a um, what was it, a manure spreader, and went in his shop. Man, they really had, that was the first, and I was young back then. I just thought that was the neatest thing to see that belt system. And I thought, well, this is a hell of a good idea. And then I watched how they'd hooked up those belts and stuff, and he had a really neat system. And he ran a table saw, and planer and all anything that would spin that he ran it off of that. So very, very cool. Very cool.
Because, like, a drill press has got an electric motor under it.
Yep.
A planer's got an electric motor under it. I mean, all these things have electric motors. So you
Yep.
just swap out individual electric motors for connecting to the main system.
Yep.
It's fascinating, and to this day and age, there are people who go, oh, the mechanical age, and we got robots and all this other stuff. But listen, the our forefathers back after, well, actually, it probably started in the 1850s, but by the 1860s, when the Civil War started, there was a great demand for machines and for machining, meaning because I mean, think about all of them muskets they had to make. I mean, there were people I was looking at. It was like, look how many uniforms they had to make. And they had sewing factories, and they had seamstresses, and but so you look at it and it was like it wasn't just about guns and bullets. There was a whole lot more to the war. And
Yep.
I've, I've heard in listening to this yesterday, it was that um, the French had the United States had borrowed money from the French, and
Yep.
the War of 1812 they kind of stymied them, and so the French really wanted to get money back from the North, and so they were pushing the Southerners to fight with the North, so the North was capitulate and pay off the French. Well, in the meantime, the Americans borrowed money from the British again, and off they went. So we still owe money. But anyway,
Oh,
I'm sorry. I keep getting distracted.
that's all right. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about Henry Clyman. He was a frontier explorer, mountain man, and a pioneer settler. He was born in Virginia on February 1st, 1792, in Farquhar County, Virginia, on a farm that his father leased from none other than George Washington. Wow. In fact, the retired first president would occasionally ride out to inspect his lands. How cool is that? And young James may have seen him during those early years. Clyman's family were respectable tenant farmers, and they soon yearned for land of their own in the growing West. Of course, they did. Who wouldn't want to have their own land? When James was 15, the family migrated westward, first to Pennsylvania and then on to Ohio frontier, settling in Stark County, Ohio by 1811. Growing up on the edge of the American frontier, James learned to hunt and handle a rifle from a young age. Well, of course, back in those days in 1811, the Ohio was like wild frontier country.
Big
Of
time.
course, yeah, the Indians were out there. You had a. I mean, it was wild lands. Well, these skills, his family, pioneering, and spirit helped prepare him for an adventurous life that he would lead in the future. In 1812, as a young man of 20, James Clyman joined the frontier militia during the War of 1812, serving as a ranger in fights against the Shoshone Indians, or the Shawnee, not the Shoshone, Shawnee Indians, who were allied with the British. Frontier Ohio was dangerous. Yeah, like we were saying, the Indians were out there. It was wild man's country. And Clyman experienced the realities of warfare and survival. During his military service, he also acquired a valuable peacetime skill, land surveying. Remember, as you go west, the land is unsurveyed, and they needed lots of surveyors. And surveying work was quite dangerous because the Indians knew what you were doing, and they didn't like it.
And if
Surveyors
you
were,
know anything about surveying, how they surveyed it with was with two rods, and they still use those kind of things today. But it's more GPS and laser. But think about the chains on a for a football game,
Hmm.
you know, and they
Yep.
would put a chain, and they would say it's so many chains. So they would, one guy'd hold a chain and the other guy'd go out however long it was. And then the other guy would trade places with him. And so they would walk through the wilderness, chain, 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 and record it. That's how
Yeah.
they knew. I mean, so going up the side of a mountain, was chain, chain, chain. I mean, it was brutal. It was brutal.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Remember George Washington was worked as a surveyor for a while too.
And so
So
did so did Robert E. Lee
really,
before
I
the war.
did not know that.
Yeah, he
Huh.
was a great surveyor. In fact, if it hadn't been for the war, he would have been remembered more as a surveyor of Western lands out. Mississippi before the war was still woolly bully. So was parts of Alabama, and so they were just starting to move west. But so when Louisiana and Arkansas was starting to open up, they were right there surveying. So yeah, but Robert E. Lee was a surveyor as well.
Wow. Interesting. Well, anyway, as the United States pushed west, Clyman learned to measure land and map the wilderness, a talent that would serve him through his life. After the war, Clyman did a stint of ordinary frontier life. He took up farming in Indiana, settling down, I guess, and dabbled in trading with the local Native Americans. But routine farming could not contain his restless spirit for long. And by 1821, he had put his survey knowledge to use and found work with the government survey team. Um, he was hired by William S. Hamilton, a son of Alexander Hamilton. Go figure. He's messing with all the bigwigs to help survey the tracks in Illinois wilderness along the Little Vermilion and the Saginaw rivers. Okay, this job brought him to St. Louis, Missouri in early 1823. And that was the place to hang out. To collect his pay, and there he later joked that he loitered about a bit too long and fate came a knock. So what happened? Well, in 1823, that was the gateway to the West. St. Louis was, and bustling and opportunist traders. While in town, James Clyman met General William H. Ashley. We all know who he was, and he was recruiting people. Missouri's lieutenant governor, who was assembling a fur trading expedition up the Missouri River. So look at that. He's going to become one of Ashley's 100. Ashley was recruiting rugged young men for his venture, and famous as the Ashley's 100, and Clyman caught his eye. With his frontier skills and surveying experience, Clyman signed on. He said, what the heck? In the spring of 1823, he joined Ashley's fur trading expedition bound for the Rockies, a decision that launched him into life as a mountain man at age 31. Wow, he's kind of old for being a mountain man. Most of them guys were like 22 to 28. So he's pushing the old side. They're probably calling him old man by this time. Clyman's first taste of the far west was harsh and immediate. In the late May 1823, Ashley's party was attacked by Arikara warriors while ascending the Missouri River. The trappers and keel boats came under deadly fire from two Arikara villages. Clyman and Arikaras were quite violent Indians. They really didn't like trappers. They didn't like anybody. Clyman and the other men fought back desperately. In turn, what one historian called the worst disaster in the history of Western fur trade, with about 15 men killed. At one point, Clyman and fellow frontiersman Jedediah Smith, and we talked about him, held their ground side by side on a riverbank, returning gunfire against overwhelming odds. When the order to retreat came, Clyman was among the last to flee. Wow, talk about brave. He had to swim the Missouri River under a hail of bullets, even letting go of his rifle and pistols to stay afloat. And that was one thing you really didn't do back in those days, was give up your gun. Upon reaching the bank, he was chased on foot for over an hour by 3 Arikara braves across the prairie before he finally shook off his pursuers and found a hiding spot. Eventually, he reunited with the remnants of Ashley's command downstream. It was a baptism by fire in the Rocky Mountain fur trade. I guess so. You either die or live, one or the other. I guess back in those days.
Survive.
Or just survive.
You adapt.
Yes, exactly. You're one of the tough ones, I guess, or lucky. Lucky or tough, one or the other. Well, Clyman barely escaped with his life, but he proved his courage. The Arikara War in 1823 became a notorious incident, and Clyman had been at the bloody front. Despite the setback, Ashley was determined to continue westward. He split his forces, sending a group of men overland to reach the central Rocky Mountains. And Jedediah Smith led this overland party. We talked about Jedediah Smith too. And James Clyman was among those chosen to go with him, along other notable mountain men like William Sublette, who we talked about last week. And this journey west from the Missouri River into the wilds of present-day South Dakota and Wyoming would be filled with both perils and discoveries. During the march in the Black Hills, the party had a now legendary encounter that tested Clyman's ingenuity and grit. In early 1824, not long after the Arikara fight, Jedediah Smith was ambushed by a grizzly bear. Again, not again, but we talked about that. The huge grizzly charged out of a thicket and mauled Jedediah terribly, slashing his head, shredding his face, and nearly tearing off one of his ears. Remember, we talked about, hey boys, my ear fell off. Can you sew it on and sew on my hair? Rip my skull or my hair right off of my head. Here. Anybody got needle and thread? Oh, I guess it ain't fun. It's funny, but it's not.
I've got a toupee.
Yeah, I don't want a toupee. Just sew it on, Just sew on my toupee. Anyway.
Could you imagine, flopping around and fighting the bear? There had to have been all kinds of dirt and crud that got up under, I just...
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway.
I wonder why people got infections and died.
Yeah,
well, anyway.
and the fact that he survived as long as he did, as we discussed, it's marvelous that he had such healing powers. You know what I mean?
Yep. Well, anyway, this was one of Clyman's steadinesses under pressure that saved his friend. He was there for that. I guess he helped him, escape. This famous incident would be recounted in mountain man lore for generations, and Clyman's own diary accounted it for primary tale of his. And through 1824, Clyman, Smith, and the companions pushed deeper into the uncharted territory in present-day Wyoming. Now, if you've been to Wyoming, it's on the west side, it's really great, and on the east side, it's just desert nothingness. Traveling across the high plains and mountains, they had to survive off the land. And in 1824, late 1824, and this is the fall, Clyman and William Sublette nearly froze to death in a sudden prairie blizzard, an episode that proved Clyman's resourcefulness is once again. Remember, you're out on the plains there, and you can gather up a lot of firewood, build yourself a shelter. Depends on where you're at, but if it gets cold, the temperatures out here drop suddenly. I mean, even today, it was warm during the day, and by the time I got done with my horse ride, it had already dropped some temperature, and it was getting cold, and I was like, man, I wish I had a jacket.
Yep.
How did this happen? The two men were trapping on a wintry mountainside and had just managed to shoot a buffalo for food. As night fell, they built a small sagebrush fire to cook the meat, but a fierce gust of wind scattered the fire and buried them in snow. With temperatures plummeting, they shivered through the night with no fire, minimal shelter. and by morning, both men in dire straits from cold and hunger. Most people nowadays would have just died. Their hands were so numb they could barely strike flint and steel to restart a fire. Sensing that Sublet was close to freezing to death, Clyman frantically searched the ashes of their extinguished campfire and miraculously found a tiny live coal, the size of a kernel of corn, still glowing. Wow. He gently nursed the ember into a small flame, but without enough fuel, the fire would not last. In a last-ditch effort, Clyman urged that they mount up and head for a distant clump of timber about 5 miles away. Oh, that's crazy. Back in them days, 5 miles was, whoa, that was a long ways. It'd take you 2 hours to ride that. Sublet was so weakened that he could barely stay on his horse, or Sublet, yeah. Partway into the trees, Clyman himself began succumbing to the cold. He jumped off his horse, jogged through the snow to keep his blood moving. He reached an old abandoned Indian lodge in the woods and immediately built a roaring fire inside. Then Clyman ran back out a half a mile, found the half-frozen Sublet and the horses, and brought them to the shelter. I assisted him to dismount and get to the fire, Clyman recorded. Sublet was nearly lifeless, but Clyman warmed him up, cooked buffalo meat on a stick, and after some time managed to revive his companion with food and heat. William Sublet survived that night entirely thanks to James Clyman. Wow. You imagine? You get to the thing, and then you run back half a mile to get your buddy in the snow and the cold after you found a little place to warm up. Geez, I tell you. And then hope he's alive. Anyway,
Yeah.
back.
I have lived through some cold weather, but not ice and snow. But being down here in South Georgia, of course, last year we had 6 inches of snow.
Yeah.
I still have pictures, but anyway, so we got to think about it. Pioneers back in the day, that snow that came last year down here to North Florida and South Georgia. I can't imagine what the pioneers would have thought. They would have went to bed at night and there's you know, storm clouds and they woke up to 6 or 8 inches of snow. What?
Yeah.
That would have ruined their day. So if that can happen in South Georgia, I can imagine what it would be like out there in the open plains. So,
Yeah.
woo, that's cold.
Yeah. When the wind comes through in the plains, it I'm out here, and it comes through. It really hits you hard. It has no mercy because it doesn't. You got nowhere to. If you just get away from the wind, it isn't so bad. It's just. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when I was out there in the summertime, and it was about this time of year when we were out there, I had to wear a jacket in the daytime because the wind blowing across the prairie, it was chilly, and there was no get behind something. You could get behind your vehicle, but
Mm,
there ain't no trees out yonder. I don't know if I could make it long without trees.
I know
I
it's
tell
it's
you.
hard. It's a big hard adjustment. Trust me. It's a hard
Yep.
adjustment. I'm from Wisconsin with lots of trees to out here where there's really no trees. The whole place
It's
has got
nothing.
nothing. It's like where's the windbreak? But anyway, so they build windbreaks out here. That's what they do. Anyway, let's move on. Otherwise, we're never going to get this conquered by the hour. 1824 and 25. The band of trappers establish a camp in the Wind River Valley. I wonder why they call it Wind River. Short on supplies, they traded with the Crow Indians for horses and sustenance. Well, now the Crow, they were big traders with the mountain men. Okay, remember, what's the guy? Became a Crow chief. Oh yeah, and I did get his book too. I forget where I put it, but I did get his book. I got it here a little bit ago. I must have put it somewhere. Anyway, Moving south and west as the seasons changed, became some of the first Americans to traverse the central Rocky Mountain region. In the spring of 1825, Clyman and others made a momentous geographical discovery. While trekking along a high, cold plain at the southern end of the Wind River Range, they noticed a water course flowing not east but west. They realized that they had crossed the Continental Divide. In fact, they had come through the broad saddle of land that became known as the South Pass. South Pass in present-day Wyoming had actually been sighted by a few historian explorers back in 1812, but it was essentially unknown to the American public. And Jedediah Smith, Thomas Fitzpatrick, and James Clyman are credited with rediscovering the South Pass in 1824, recognizing it as a wide, gentle gap through the Rockies. Ain't that cool? And it was suitable for wagon travel. And this was an enormously important find. Unlike the steep, narrow mountain passes of Colorado or Montana, South Pass was a broad plateau that would eventually allow thousands of immigrant wagons to roll west along the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails. In Clyman's time, of course, they were just looking for beaver streams, but confirming the South Pass route, Clyman and his comrades helped open the door to the west for future settlers. Well, it's no exaggeration to say that carving out the Great American West frontier would have been far more difficult without the South Pass. And thanks to Clyman and the other guys, that helped move people west in a better way, I guess. Faster and easier. Well, moving on, the next year, Clyman continued to roam the mountains and wilderness in pursuit of fur and discovery. And during 25 and 26, he trapped beaver along the Green River in what is now western Wyoming. The fur trade was booming, and the rendezvous gatherings were held each summer for trappers to sell their furs and resupply. And Clyman, at the 1825 Mountain Man Rendezvous on the Sweetwater River, afterward he became temporarily separated from his group and experienced a harrowing solo trek. Stranded alone with some hostile Native Americans chasing off his horses, Clyman decided to walk all the way back to the settled frontier on foot rather than die in the wilderness. He was hundreds of miles from the nearest fort with only his rifle, a handful of bullets, and minimal gear. Clyman trekked about 600 miles across the unknown country, surviving by his wits. And at one point, he lost most of his ammunition during a skirmish with the Indians and was down to a single bullet. But ingeniously, he would shoot a buffalo, retrieve the spent musket ball from the carcass, hammer it back into a roughly round shape, reload it, and reuse it. Now that's ingenuity. You think you could do that? I don't know.
I could if I had to. But if I was back in the day, yeah.
Shoot a buffalo, then find the bullet that you shot the buffalo with. Then
retrieve that bullet. Yep.
That's the hard part. I mean, yeah, if you just gave me the bullet and said, "Well, look, there it is," I'd be okay, and I'd probably could hammer it back. But you have to find the bullet. That's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Well, at least you know where it went in, and so that shouldn't be too far to trace.
Yeah. Well, he did it. He endured
Since he only had one bullet to look for.
Yeah. Well, lucky he shot the buffalo. Otherwise, it's gone. It's gone. It's gone.
Good thing he didn't miss, right?
Yes. Good thing he did. That's what I'm saying. If you would have missed, you'd have been hungry, no bullets. You might as well throw the gun away. And so anyway, he endured extreme cold, exhaustion, and Clyman later wrote that he sometimes wandered in circles and could not sleep due to exposure. Yet he pressed on. See, back in those days when you get hypothermia, you just wake up one day and you go, okay, I'm out here. I got to get going. I know I'm delirious, but I'm not. I got to keep going. nowadays people get delirious, hypothermia, and they just die. They're weak. Uh, After 8 days of lonely travel, he finally spotted the United States flag flying over Fort Atkinson in present-day Omaha, Nebraska. That's quite a journey. Overcome with relief of signs of civilization, the hardened mountain man collapsed in a dead faint as the sight of Old Glory. Then he regained consciousness. He knew he was safe, and it was the end of an epic solo journey, a testament to his endurance. Clyman later said, "Certainly no man ever enjoyed the sight of a flag better than I did at that moment." Well, 1826, he headed back out. He didn't have enough yet. And he headed out back to the Rockies and joining up again with General Ashley's operation once more. Next couple of years, a high point of his career as a trapper and explorer. But in 1826, Clyman participated in another historic exemplary feat that he went up to, well, let's just put it this way. He went to the Great Salt Lake. And that summer, Jedediah Smith, led by a party, including Clyman, and other veterans like Moses Black Harris and Luis Vequez, I'm saying that wrong, and Henry Frapp, along the uncharted northern shores of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The going on was tough and the terrain too barren for the horses, so resourceful mountaineers built bull boats. Now we know what bull boats are. They're round, and you stretch the buffalo hide across them, and you kind of sit in them, and you paddle, just like a round homemade canoe. Anyway, in these makeshift boats, Clyman and 3 others paddled around the Great Salt Lake, a journey that took 24 days. They suffered from thirst and exposure, and on the salty inland sea, but their exploration yielded a crucial insight. The Great Salt Lake had no outlet. For decades, fanciful maps had conjured a mighty river flowing west from the lake to the Pacific Ocean. And Clyman's expedition proved this to be a myth. It was false. And they found nothing but a widespread salt lake, immersed like a salty, watery desert. There was no great river, nothing. It was a great geographical discovery, things like that. Anyway, but didn't do anything. It was just a lake. By the 1827, having explored huge swaths of the far west and amassed a fortune in furs, James Clyman decided to return to settled life. He attended a final rendezvous and sold his year's catch of beaver pelts for the impressive sum of $1,251, a small fortune in those days. 4 years of perilous wanderings had paid off, and Clyman packed up his earnings and headed back to civilization, you could say. Oh, well, anyway, that ain't the end of it. Back in civilization, Clyman initially tried to make use of his wealth that he earned, which most of the guys would do. He'd been out there for 4 or 5 years, so now he's like probably, 34, 35. And in 1827, he bought a substantial farm near Danville, Vermilion County in Illinois. Rather than farm it himself, he set up 2 of his brothers to manage the farm for him. And true to his character, Clyman himself wasn't ready to settle down just yet. And for a time, he did enjoy some comforts of settled life, running a store in Illinois and reconnecting with old friends. But he wasn't for him, and frontier was calling his name. And in 1832, with a brief and bloody Black Hawk War, we talked about that once before, broke out in Illinois and Wisconsin. Clyman volunteered for service, and the conflict pitted a band of Sauk and Fox Indians under Chief Black Hawk against the Illinois militia and the U.S. Army. Clyman joined the militia forces and thus found himself serving alongside some notable figures of the era. And again, he's rubbing elbows with the big guys. He enlisted in the company where a tall young captain named Abraham Lincoln was his commanding officer. And another private in the ranks was James Fraser Reed, an Illinois settler. While Lincoln and Clyman likely did not know each other that well, it's intriguing that the future president and the second mountain man shared, or the seasoned mountain man shared, the same campfires during the war. Clyman and James Reed did not become acquainted. A friendship, or they did become acquainted, a friendship that would resurface years later on the Overland Trail. The Black Hawk War was a brief affair. We talked about that. It was kind of it was bad. And they got defeated really bad. Clyman's unit mostly spent time pursuing Black Hawk's band through the rough country. But by August of 1832, the war was over and Black Hawk was defeated. Clyman had once again answered a call to fight in helping secure the frontier for the American settlement of Illinois and Wisconsin. He mustered out of military service in 1834 and returned home without much fanfare. Many years later, he could claim the unique distinction of having served under Abraham Lincoln, something he would mention in passing when reminiscing with old comrades. Restless as ever, Clyman soon set out to find a new frontier. He was bored again, and with his friend Hiram Ross, and ventured north into the wilderness of the Wisconsin Territory around 1834 and 35. It's hard to imagine that Wisconsin was a wilderness. The pair claimed a tract of government land in what was now the remote forest land that later became the site of the city of Milwaukee. Ooh, the remote forest land of Milwaukee. Milwaukee's a big city. I've been to Milwaukee. There's like no forest there. Cut it all down. And if Clyman had stayed, he might have become a prominent settler, but there was little taste for growing crowds, and more people poured in the area, and the town began to form. Clyman sold his claim and moved on in search of solitude. And by the fall of 1835, he and another companion, Ellsworth Burnett, decided to explore further north in Wisconsin to find truly wild land. Trip ended in tragedy and yet another brush with death for Clyman. And in November 1835, Clyman and Burnett obtained a canoe from the Native American woman while her husband and son were away, intending to travel downriver into an uninhabited territory, so they thought. Unknown to them, the woman's male relatives were outraged, not just at borrowing of the canoe, but because they sought to avenge an old grievance. The young woman's brother had been killed by a soldier at Fort Winnebago 2 years before. The father and son duo tracked the pair down, and on the second day of Clyman and Burnett's journey, as they stopped near present-day Teresa in Dodge County, Wisconsin, the two native men launched a sudden attack. Oh boy. Burnett was shot and killed on the spot. Clyman, hearing the gunfire, rushed back from collecting firewood only to see his friend fall. Clyman fled into the woods, and the attackers turned on him. Bullets whizzing past, and one musket ball struck Clyman in the left-right arm, shattering it below the elbow. Another shot from Clyman's own shotgun, which the younger pursuer had grabbed, hit him in the thigh at long range. Wounded and outnumbered, Clyman still managed to sprint through the dense forest like a deer, as he later put it. Well, I guess that adrenaline was really flowing, and he was probably pissed off because they shot him with his own gun.
Yeah, really.
And I bet you he wasn't feeling that arm until later. But yuck. He was enraged at being peppered by his own gun, yeah, it says. But anyway, survival came first, and Clyman ran until the voice of his pursuers faded, and then hid himself under a fallen tree in a swampy thicket. It was an incredible twist, and the two attackers actually walked on top of the very log while searching for him, not realizing Clyman lay silently directly beneath their feet. He waited until they gave up the hunt. And once the coast was clear, the tedious, Clyman began to an agonizing 50-mile track back to the nearest settlement. Now remember, he's got a broken arm, he's bleeding in the thigh. Oh my gosh, and yet he still trekked on 50 miles on foot. He traveled by night and hid by day. Cold November
Now,
rain fell, huh?
how many? I was just thinking, um, without any trails or roads or whatever, it'd be hard enough if there were roads or at least a trail to
Yeah,
travel 25 or 50 miles, but to travel, that far, um, you know, through the wilderness,
yep.
holy moly. These guys were just unbelievably the the internal strength and fortitude these folks had, just unbelievable.
That's right. And this was in
And no,
November. Wait,
and
wait.
no wonder they were revered, and no wonder that they had, become, I'm looking for the word, notorious,
Yeah.
because folks back then knew what it was like to travel 25 miles in the snow. And they were like, you did what? People now, they go, oh, 25 miles in the snow. Ooh, big deal. No, but folks back then were like, oh man, I can't believe you went 25 miles in the snow. It was folks back then knew the
Mhm.
hardships. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. Well, he trekked all the way back to Milwaukee, where that little town, which is now a big town, he made it back there, and people heard of his escape, and became legendary. So that was kind of his
That's what I
thing.
was looking for. Legendary. I mean, when the word got around, when he made it back to the general store and was sitting there by the fire and where you been and blah blah blah, and folks heard the story, and they it got around, and the guy at the general store told the story to everybody that came in, and next thing everybody in the territory right there knew of what he had been through. So it didn't take long for him to become legendary.
Yep, that's for sure. Well, anyway, now it's 1835. After this attack in 1835, he was about 43 years old. Back in those days, you're an old man by that time. And he accumulated plenty of scars. Uh, Him and his friend Hiram Ross, they built a sawmill near Milwaukee River, and which is now Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Clyman settled into the role of a frontier entrepreneur, milling lumber for the growing settlements. He continued in the sawmill business for several years. That was big business back then. Appearing because they
Yeah,
built everything,
really
everything.
big business.
Yes, there's plenty of trees and sawmills everywhere. They built everything from the sidewalks to that's why Chicago was down. It was all built out of that cheap pine wood that they were cutting up there. Um, Appearing to live a life of ordinary, he was well. Those who met him in this period formed a very favorable impression of him. They remembered James Clyman as a middle-aged, as tall, spare man of nearly 6 foot tall, straight-backed and slender, with a sandy-colored hair and a defining bearing about him. Despite his wild life, he was known to be modest and soft-spoken and agreeable in manner. He carried himself almost like an old world gentleman. Indeed, one person thought Clyman resembled George Washington himself. And so, well, he was a Virginia born woodsman, so you never know. Unlike many rough drifters of fur trade, Clyman was fairly well educated for his day. He loved literature and could quote Shakespeare, Bryan, and the Bible from memory. Yeah, see, he was another one of those guys who, they liked adventure, but they had a brain. He had rugged skills for outdoorsmanship with a mind of thought. And I think that's why these people escaped and they lived a longer life because, well, they had a little luck to it too.
Well,
Uh,
and when they were lonely or about by themselves, being able to read, they could have a little pocket Bible that they could read, which would keep them company. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
and depending, they could, if he was quoting Shakespeare, then he might have a book of plays or verses or something, and that he carried with him. And so when late at nights around the campfire, he could read those types of things, which helped to keep his education up, if you know what I mean. So they might have only had a couple of books out there with them, but they would read them books from cover to cover. You know,
Over and
they
over.
knew every word.
That's right. Um, well, so he combined all his stuff like that. Well, and he had knowledge of writing. And again, another one of these guys who kept a journal of most of his adult life. So he was writing down all of his adventures as they happened, because, that when they happen, jogs your memory. Otherwise, it's like, hey, what did you do last week? I don't know. I was attacked by some Indians, I think. Or was that the week before? I don't know. I met Abraham Lincoln. When? I don't know. I can't remember. But he wrote all this stuff down.
And a lot of people
And wow.
did. A lot of people kept little notebooks. I mean, we wouldn't know so much about the Civil War if it weren't for some of those privates and folks that were out on the battlefield that wrote notes in their journals and stuff and letters back to different relatives and things. So, there was a lot of folks who could read and write. It was important. And by saying the same thing, because he started a sawmill with his brothers, I think with his brothers. Oh no, that was the farm.
Yes.
He also we talked about this before, and I just like to bring it up, but he also knew how to cipher. You know,
Yeah.
he knew how to add and subtract. So that made him important too. So if he could read and write that well, he knew how to cipher. So nobody could pull the wool over his eyes, if you will, because he knew how to add and subtract. So it was like, no, you can't cheat me. So, and that made him more effective. Okay,
That
I'm done.
So what did he do with all these journals? Well, he started writing, and when in the idle months of the winter, when the sawmill wasn't going, he made a ledger with musings and topics ranging from Roman history to nature and the universe. He scribbled tall tales, uh, which were not your typical tall tales. Clyman was analytic and factual in his writings. He had the eye of a surveyor and a soul of a poet. These journals, precise and sober in tone, would later prove to be the treasure trove of first-hand information about the early West. However, as content as Clyman may have been for a few years, by the early 1840s, he began to feel the pull of the West once more, and the frontier was on the move again. And this time, large wagon trains of American settlers, and James Clyman, realizing he had a role to play, he took on this and headed west, young man. Well, now he's old, but he's heading west. He was trailblazing the Oregon and California from 1844. He went down, and Clyman was nearly 52 years old. He was really getting old by this time. A venerable age for a frontiersman, and had been living a relatively settled life in Wisconsin and Illinois for a decade. He was troubled by a lingering cough, perhaps a reminder of the freezing ordeals. He yearned for a healthier air and adventure in the wilderness. And that spring, he decided to join the new wave of immigrants heading west to Oregon. In May 1844, Clyman traveled to Independence, Missouri, the famous jumping off point for the overland trails, and he signed on with a wagon train bound for Oregon. Unlike his solitary mountain man travels, he was with a large caravan of pioneer families in covered wagons, and Clyman started keeping a detailed daily journal again, noting everything from the landscape to the behavior of his fellow travelers. To him, many of these greenhorn immigrants were inexperienced on the trail, and he was happy to share his knowledge. He even chaperoned a group of young ladies one afternoon so they could safely pick wild currants and chokecherries, joking about playing the gallant guard in his diary. He also observed how much the frontier had changed since his trapping days. For example, he wrote that the Bear River Valley, which is now in Idaho and Utah, the buffalo had entirely disappeared in the last 7 to 8 years, whereas they once roamed there in abundance. The great herds had been pushed farther west by hunting and migration, a sign of how the American frontier was steadily advancing. Wow, so that's something. I mean, here he is, 1844, and he's already saying things are changing. Wow,
So
because
within his lifetime, he has seen a drastic change.
yeah, and that was only 25 or 20 years since he'd been out there, and I mean, if it wasn't for him shooting a buffalo out in those territories, he probably would have died, and now there's no buffalo to shoot. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's things are changing, and the pioneers are coming across and they're shooting all the buffalo. No wonder why the Indians were mad.
So
We used to
and
have buffalo, they're gone.
what, he's 54 years old ish, and so
52.
so in a half a century, he has already seen a drastic change. Is my point. So
Yep.
keep going.
Well, he
I'm
did
in my
the Oregon
72
Trail.
years. I've seen a drastic change. How many of us
Yeah.
can look back over the last 20 or 30 years and go, "Holy moly, drastic change." So, but anyway,
Yeah. Well, he spent the across the Oregon Trail, ventured south to California. So he went to in 1845. Spent the winter of 1845 and 46 in the vicinity of Captain John Sutter settlement, which is Sacramento, California. And at this time, it was still Mexican territory, but the American settlers and mountain men were filtering in, and Clyman took note of the land's potential. And though he had some criticisms, the journal entries, he commented on California's farming methods and lack thereof, and the poor, discontent foreigners were trying to live easy lives there. Oh, they're still doing that there. Despite
yeah.
such grumbles, California's mild climate appealed to him. Yeah, so nothing's changed in California. People go there to be lackadaisy, and they're still there being lackadaisy. Yeah, that winter, Clyman struck up a business arrangement with Captain Sutter, and Sutter was eager to attract more American settlers to California. And as he foresaw the territory would soon pass from Mexico to the United States, and he could use more manpower for the farms, Sutter hired James Clyman to act as a guide and promoter for the California Trail. Specifically, Sutter offered Clyman a modest fee to travel east in the spring of 1846 and intercept immigrant parties on their way to Oregon. Clyman's job would be to persuade settlers to turn south on California Trail instead of going all the way to Oregon's Willamette Valley. Essentially, Sutter wanted Clyman to help divert a portion of the westward migration into California, boosting the American population there. And for Clyman, this was an appealing proposition. Well, he headed back to the United States the spring, anyway, because at that time it was Mexican territory. The veteran frontiersman knew the trails intimately and could, under good conscience, recommend California's fertile Sacramento Valley as a destination while still warning about the trail that was difficult. Well, thus, in the spring of 1846, James Clyman joined a small eastbound group leaving California. It was an interesting crew. At its head was Caleb Greenwood, an 82-year-old mountain man legend. We're going to have to do a show on this guy. And who, despite his age, was an experienced wagon guide and two half Paiute sons helping him. Caleb Greenwood had only 2 years earlier guided the first ever wagons across the Sierra Nevadas. How about that? Also in the party was Langford W. Hastings, a young Ohio lawyer turned adventurer who had grand designs of his own. Hastings had written The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, a popular handbook that encouraged pioneers to consider the shortcut route to California that he claimed I have identified as Hastings' dream of carving out the California. Well, that was not a good thing because that's the one that the Donner Party followed and went there and they got stuck in the Sierra Nevadas. And so we're running a little short on time. We're going to skip to the end. He met he met Jim Bridger. He went to the Great Salt Lake again. He met. Let's see. Okay, many immigrants parties heeded Clyman's sober advice. In fact, former Missouri Governor Libon Boggs, who once led a large wagon company, decided after speaking with Clyman to avoid Hastings' route. This was after the Donner Party. Boggs promptly diverted to Oregon instead of California, but not everyone was convinced. So anyway, don't go that way, he said, basically.
Yeah, well, at least, you could go in the summertime if you wanted to, but don't go in the winter.
That's right. Okay. Well, we'll just sum this all up. In summer, he started life in early republic and lived to see railroads cross the plains. He was an unsung hero who stitched together the map of America. And with his journeys, deeds, and words, by exploring unmapped regions, confronting dangers at every turn, and guiding those who followed, Clyman and men like him transformed the wilderness into land of opportunity. As one historian noted, Clyman's life was varied and dramatic. He was himself the westward moving frontier. His exceptional character and skills enlarged what was possible for the pioneers, and thanks to James Clyman's quiet heroism to settle the West safely, and the United States ultimately spanned a continent. In every sense, James Clyman helped carve out the great American frontier, and his story remains a powerful testament to grit, ingenuity, and relentless drive of the American spirit. Well, he lived a long, fruitful life.
Let me add something.
I mean,
when
okay.
when he went out with the wagon trains, the fact that he was teaching the greenhorns what to do and how to do, and that was invaluable information because those folks that were headed west were from cities, and they're much like the youngins of today. They don't know how to do squat. you know I mean, they don't know how to split wood. They wouldn't know how to fish from
Yep,
a stream. They wouldn't know how to do nothing, especially oh, here comes the Indian. Now what do I do? So but the
that's
fact
right.
that he went with the wagon trains, and the fact that he was going back east with the wagon train, shows how valuable he was, you know
Yep.
and but the fact that he helped establish what was through that lower pass. What was it? The southern route.
Yeah, the southern California passed through the Sierra Nevadas.
Yeah, and for those folks who might not know, Sacramento is basically in the middle of the state. So everything north of Sacramento is redwood trees and mountains and stuff. And, but everything south of there is where towards San Francisco is where you get in all the other kind of stuff. And, and it gets hotter. And anyway, so, but having been in the northern part of California, I loved it, man. It was beautiful. But the southern part, not so much for me. But anyway, so Sacramento's right in the middle of the state, and so he was trying to get people to like come, stay here, kind of thing, instead of going on up to Oregon, which the weather is much better in California than it is when they got to Oregon with all that fog and rain. that
That's
never
right.
quits, and Mount St. Helens, and So anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, let's finish this up with in his twilight years, claiming seeing that peace, with the closing of the frontier. Of course, there was no more frontier left. On Decoration Day, Memorial Day, 1881, the same year he died. So he lived he was in his 80s. Can you imagine? You're in the 1700s talking to George Washington, and then you're in the 1880s where they're driving around just about, they got cars and trains and telegraphs and light bulbs and, all that stuff. The Civil War is come and gone. The slave, when you're on your Virginia farm, you probably had some slaves, and now slaves are free. It's crazy. The Indians were once wild and hostile, and you were fighting them off, and now they're all penned up on reservations. Just
And
goes to
now
show.
they're traveling around and giving shows to people in
Yeah,
the city. Of all, because
exactly.
that's about when the Wild West show started. But also, paddle
Yeah, because
boats and things like that, going back up and down the Mississippi. So where they had to use
yeah,
to literally paddle a boat to get to St. Louis, or
yeah.
sail. That
Now you
now they
just
had paddle boats that went up and down all kinds. I mean, they had paddle boats on the Flint River back in the old days. That's near here. So,
yeah,
paddle boats were all over the place back in those days. So, to I don't know, to be born in an age where everything was just horse and wagons and walking, to he moved into the space age almost, because they even had balloons, and they were learning how to um, trying to fly, and folks in France and stuff, but the paddle boat and all that. So he you know he lived in a time where he saw a lot of changes, is what I'm trying to say. He
yeah.
witnessed a lot of stuff.
He did. He did.
And
Okay.
the fact that he helped to tame the West is like, you go, boy.
Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see. He wrote a short poem honoring fallen heroes with flowers on their graves. It is a touching image that in those lines he might have not been saluting not only Civil War dead, but also those hardy souls, trappers, scouts, and pioneers who fell along the carving out our nation. James Clyman, own grave in Napa. Napa is far from the battlefields and trails of his youth, but it represents the completion of America's manifest destiny. A man born on George Washington's Virginia soil ended up helping plant the United States flag on the Pacific coast. So, he's seen it all. I mean, you're right. He's seen this from the railroads coming across, Civil War, transforming the wilderness into, opportunity. All the states getting, you could see America being put on the map. You know what I mean? From coast to coast by 1880. Uh, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
but by that time, where they had gone up the Missouri River in his youth, now they had paddle boats going up the Missouri River. You know, so him and
that's
his
right.
boys, they went up before there was any such thing, and then by the 1880s, there were paddle boats all over the place. So
Well,
and steamboats,
exactly.
you know. So, but anyway, I'm just my point is that look how much the migration west
Yep.
in his lifetime. You know,
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. Totally agree. It's just amazing. You start thinking about it. I'm gonna look this guy up and see if I can find his journals or his stories, or they must have some books about him somewhere. That
what
that he wrote.
Clayman?
Yeah, like Beckworth. I got Beckworth's book here somewhere. I just moved all my books today. I think I packed them all
Yeah,
in
we
with
need to
the
look up and see if maybe there's some stories that he wrote that we might could read at some point in time. You know, that would be an interesting read. Literally, would be to read a story from some of them pioneers. You know.
That's true. And with that, speaking of stories, we got a story.
See, that was a good segue, wasn't
It was. It was. Uh,
it? Mm.
who was saved by his thoughts. Oh, this is going to be an interesting one.
Yes, it is an interesting story,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
um, this is sort of a side note. Yesterday, I was sitting here, and my friend Rob stopped by to check on me, and I was sitting here telling him how there are times when I would, between Elderberry and myself, there are some times that around, 4:30 in the afternoon or such, we would call one another and say, "Hey, let's hang out for a little bit." And sometimes we'd be on the phone for 2 or 3 hours, just chatting and BSing. So I was telling
Yep.
him, my friend, I said, there have been many a times like me and you just sitting here talking. And I said, I'll call him up or he'll call me up. And about that time, the phone rang and it was him. And it was like, what? Barry, I was just talking. Wow, that's interesting. So, but anyway, so with that said, um, there is some of the current science that tries to explain ESP, or that kind of thing, is that we share the same frequency, and they call it modulation. So that we share the same modulation. So me and Barry, after the last couple of years, we have achieved a certain amount of modulation. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's almost like we can hear each other talking, okay? So this does exist, but for the this story to be told so many years ago as part of the story of the for the First Nations is very, 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 very interesting to me. Okay, it explains the power of thought. So, all right, let me get something to drink here, and then I'll start. But when I saw this story, and I read it earlier before you and I started, I read it all the way through, and I was like, man, this is just, yeah, buddy, this has got um a lot of relevancy today.
Yep. Cool.
Okay, so
Okay. On
I'll
the
shut
word.
up and we'll get to the story. All right, here we go. So, um, ladies and gentlemen, tonight's story is the boy who was saved by thoughts, and it's from the book Glooscap Country and Other Indian Tales by Cyrus McMillan from 1922. That's 102 years ago, 3 years ago. So, here's the story. The boy who was saved by thoughts. A poor widow woman once lived near the sea in eastern Canada. Her husband had been drowned catching fish one stormy day far off the coast, and her little boy was now her only means of support. He had no brothers or sisters, and he and his mother, because they lived alone, were always good comrades. Although he was very young and small, he was very strong, and he could catch fish and game like a man. Every day he brought home food to his mother, and they were never in want. Now it happened that the great eagle, who made the winds in these parts, became very angry because he was not given enough to eat. He went screaming through the land in search of food, but no food could he find. And he said, "If the people will not give me food, I will take care that they get no food for themselves. And when I grow very hungry, I shall eat up all the little children in the land, for my young ones must have nourishment too." So he tossed the waters about with the wind of his great wings, and he bent the trees and flattened the corn. And for days he made such a hurly-burly on the earth that the people stayed indoors, and they were afraid to come out in search of food. At last the boy and his mother became very hungry. Then the boy said, "I must go and find food, for there is not a crumb left in the house. We cannot wait longer." And he said to his mother, "I know where a fat young beaver lives in his house of reeds on the bank of the stream near the sea. I shall go and kill him, and his flesh will feed us for many days." His mother did not want him to make such a hazardous journey, for the great eagle was still in the land. But he said to her, "You must think of me always when I am gone, and I will think of you. And while we keep each other in our memories, I shall come to no harm." So, taking his long hunting knife, he set out for the beaver's home in his house of reeds on the bank of the stream near the sea. He reached the place without mishap, and there he found Beaver fast asleep. He soon killed him and slung him over his shoulder and started back to his mother's house. "A good fat load I have here," he said to himself, "and we shall now have a good dinner of roast beaver meat." But as he went along with his load on his back, the great eagle spied him from a distance and swooped down upon him without warning. Before he could strike with his knife, the eagle caught him by the shoulders and soared away, holding him in a mighty grip with the beaver still on his back. The boy tried to plunge his knife into the eagle's breast, but the feathers were too thick and tough, and he was not strong enough to drive the knife through them. He could do nothing but make the best of his sorry plight. "Surely I can think of a way to escape," he said to himself, "and my mother's thoughts will be with me to help me." Soon the eagle arrived at his home. It was built on a high cliff overlooking the sea, hundreds of feet above the beach, where even the sound of the surf rolling in from afar could not reach it. There were many young birds in the nest, all clamoring for food. Great Eagle threw the boy to the side of the nest and told him to stay there. And he said, "I shall first eat the beaver, and after he is all eaten up, we shall have a good fat meal from you." Then he picked the beaver to pieces and fed part of it to his young ones. For some days the boy lay in terror in the nest, trying to think of a way to escape. Birds flew high over his head, and far out on the ocean he could see great ships going by. But no help came to him, and he thought that death would soon be upon him. And his mother sat at home, waiting for him to return. But day after day they passed, and still he did not come. She thought he must surely be in great danger, or that perhaps he was already dead. One day, as she was weeping, thinking of her lost boy, an old woman came along. "Why do you cry?" she asked. And the weeping woman said, "My boy has been away for many days. I know that harm has come upon him. The men of my tribe have gone in search of him, and they will kill whatever holds him a prisoner. But I fear he will never come back alive." And the old woman said, "Little good the men of your tribe can do you. You must aid him with your thoughts, for material things are vain. I will help you, for I have been given great power by the little people of the hills." So the woman used her thoughts and her wishes to bring back her boy. That night the boy noticed that the beaver had all been eaten up and that not a morsel remained. He knew that unless he could save himself at once, he would surely die on the morrow. The great eagle, he knew, would swoop down upon him and kill him with a blow of his powerful beak and claws. But when the boy slept, he saw his mother in his slumber, and she said to him, "Tomorrow, when Great Eagle goes from the nest, brace your knife point upwards against the rock. When he swoops down to kill you, his breast will strike the knife, and he will be pierced to death. You are not strong enough to cut through his feathers with your knife, but he is powerful enough to destroy himself." The next morning, when Great Eagle went out, the boy did as the vision of the night had told him. He braced his sharp hunting knife point upwards against the rock and sat still and waited. Then he heard the young eagles making a great noise and crying loudly for their breakfast. He knew that his hour had come. Soon the great eagle, hearing the screams of his young ones, came flying back to the nest to kill the boy. He circled around above him with loud cries, and then, with great force, swooped down upon him, hoping to kill him with his beak and claws. But instead, he struck the blade, braced upwards against the rock. The knife pierced far into his breast, and with a loud scream, he rolled over dead into the nest. The boy then killed the young eagles, and he knew that now, for a time, he was safe. But he did not know how to get down from Eagle's Nest, for it jutted out like a shelf far over the beach, and behind it was a wall of rock around which he could not climb. He had no means of making a ladder, and his cries would not be heard upon the beach because of the constant roaring of the surf. He thought he would surely starve to death, and that night he cried himself to sleep. But in the night he again saw his mother in his slumbers, and she said, "You foolish boy, why do you not use the thoughts I send you? Tomorrow, skin the eagle and crawl inside the skin. If the wide wings can hold the eagle in the air, they can likewise hold you. Drop off from the cliff, and you will land safely on the beach." The next day, the boy did as the vision of the night had told him. He carefully skinned the great eagle. Then he crawled inside the skin and thrust his arms through the skin just above the wings so that his extended arms would hold the wings straight out beneath them. Then he prepared to drop down. But when he looked over the cliff, he was very frightened, for the sight made him dizzy. On the beach, men looked like flies, they were so far away. But he remembered the promise made to him in his slumbers. So he pushed himself from the cliff and dropped down. The wings of great eagle let him fall gently through the air, and he landed safely and unhurt upon the beach. He crawled out of the skin and set out for his home. It was a long journey, for Great Eagle had carried him far away, but towards evening he reached his home safely, and his mother received him with great gladness. The boy began to boast of his adventure, and he told how he had killed Great Eagle and how he had dropped down unscathed from the cliff. He spoke of himself with great pride and of his strength and his shrewdness. But the old woman from the land of the little people, the fairies of the hills, who was still present with his mother, said, "Oh, vain boy, do not think so highly of yourself. Your strength is nothing. Your shrewdness is nothing. It was not these things that saved you, but it was the strength of our thoughts. These alone endure and exceed when all else fails. I have taught you the uselessness of all material things, which in the end are but as ashes or as dust. Our thoughts alone can help us in the end, for they alone are eternal." And the boy listened and wondered at what the old woman from the land of the little people had said. But he boasted of his strength no more. The end. Wisdom from the little people. And so that is that story for tonight. And see, as I was talking about before I started the story, about how, even way back when, there were stories of how, you know, the thoughts and the energies of our thoughts could be helpful. And here's a story, a great example, of ancestors, 103 years ago, 1922. So, and the stories were older than that. So the fact that these kinds of thoughts Think of your mother, and the mother gave him directions, and follow those thoughts. So that's really interesting. That and to me, really appropriate for today's times, because people are just learning about what that means. So, what did you think, Robert?
I think it was really good. Something to learn from all of that. I mean, they couldn't communicate back in the day. You couldn't just tell people that you had to put it in the story, because if you didn't put it in the story, um, it's kind of like nowadays where people say, "Oh, we're getting messages through the movies. The Simpsons are telling us things in the future, or whatever." It's the same thing I think they did with those stories. They couldn't come right out and say, "Hey, you communicate with your thoughts." Well, we can put it in a story. Maybe people will think of it that way. You think?
Yeah, and the thing is that when you have it in a story, it's like, well, did it really happen, or is it a story? you know and it's like, but back then, the stories were because somebody told them that that's what happened. They first hand or second hand. Grandma told me this story that it happened when she was a kid, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
but yeah, so in this day and times, they're saying that in order for the human race to move on to the next dimension, ascend, move on, all this other stuff, that we are going to have to learn how to control those types of things. That's going to be what comes next.
Yeah.
Is that you know um, learning to deal with thoughts and being able to communicate with with each other in different ways. But here's the thing: the native folks. Um, I've been to powwows and things and worked with folks over the years. And when you find somebody that is tuned just right to you, when you're working or doing something, you don't have to say a word. You look at them and they've already got the pair of pliers that you need, or you start to think something, and the next thing you know, somebody's bringing you a drink from out but from inside the house because you're thirsty. I mean, it's just all these things. You don't have to say a word. That just sort of happens, and so,
Yeah.
but in the cities, there's so much energy and so much interference that people don't really get to understand that much. So pick your
This is
cards. I'm done shuffling. So y'all pick your cards, and
everybody pick a card now. I know that's what you guys tuned in for. So put them in the chat. We'll see what happens. I am picking beaver. I'm picking, what am I going to pick? I pick beaver. I'm going to pick armadillo. I am going to pick butterfly, swan, and grouse. There you go. That's what I got. That's my spread
Ralph,
for today. Grouse, yes. I have no clue what you picked, or what's coming up. So there you
well,
go.
I'm on card number 2. So, and did you say butterfly?
No.
No, okay,
Did
never
I say?
mind. Well, because right now it's Raven right side up. I'll be doggone. 3
What?
weeks in a row. Eagle.
Eagle. Telling us something.
Upside down. Three weeks and 3 times in a row now. So Eagle is definitely got a message for us.
That's right.
So and and I shuffle these cards real well. I always do. You know,
Mm,
and I make sure that I turn them so that um, uh, some of them are upside down, so they're not all the same right side up from the last time I shuffled. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So so I give the cards a chance to be right side up or upside down as I shuffle.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So here's what we got so far. We've got
Okay.
Raven right side up, Butterfly upside down, Eagle upside down. We have Dog right side up, and I just pulled Turtle upside down.
Turtle.
Yep, upside down. Yep,
So we got raven, butterfly, eagle, dog, turtle. Am I
yep.
missing one? I'm missing one anyway.
No, but I do have I can't. I don't know which card is the last card. It's either
Oh,
porcupine or hummingbird.
okay.
So I'm guessing hummingbird, but I'm going to wait till I get there and see what porcupine says. You know how that goes. Sometimes that
Yeah,
extra card, it it has to be there.
this is true.
So, you know, I say I don't choose the cards, they sort of choose me. So, but anyway, Raven. We have not had Raven in quite a while. I mean, it's been a
This
while
is true.
since we've had Raven. So I find that interesting in and of itself, in that we haven't had it in a while and that it just showed up. So I'm still trying to get used to my new eyes. That's a 16. I still have to blink sometimes to try to get my eyes in focus. So everything is more clear that since they've taken the cataracts out, but it's a little harder to focus sometimes. So
Yeah.
Raven is about magic. All right. So throughout time, Raven has carried the medicine of magic. This has been true in many cultures across the planet. It is sacred in the medicine ways to honor Raven as the bringer of magic. If the magic is bad medicine, the carrier may be honored out of fear. Those who fear Raven may do so because they may be dabbling in areas they're not supposed to. So Raven magic is a powerful medicine that can give you the courage to enter the darkness of the void. Okay, so where does future lie? In the void, right? So that's where um oh shoot, Swan had to go, was to go into the void, the darkness, and fear ain't part of it. So the void is called the great mystery. The great mystery existed before all other things came into being, before the Big Bang. Great Spirit lives inside the void and emerged from the great mystery. Raven is the messenger of the void. Okay? The messenger. Pay attention to that part. So if Raven appeared in your cards, you are about to experience a change in consciousness. This may involve a walking inside the great mystery on another path at the edge of time. Let me read that last part. This may involve walking inside the great mystery on another path at the edge of time. Now, I just read that story about, the boys saved by thoughts. And so here's Raven talking about a similar thing. It would portend a signal brought by the raven that says, "You have earned the right to see and experience a little more of life in the magic." So, meaning that you can see into the future, or you can perceive things, or that you can understand different energies, or why people are being stupid, or, So, that magic is the understanding of stuff. Okay. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to disappear, snap your fingers, and all that kind of stuff. But it does mean that you will be more perceptive in a lot of ways. In native teachings, the color black means many things, but it does not mean evil. Okay? So black can mean the seeking of answers in the void, or the road of the spiritual, or the non physical. So, we're always, the creator is always trying to explain to us what's next. And so Raven magic is like, okay, you've got something, that's spiritual coming up, and a change in consciousness. Okay. So that's the voice card. The second card is butterfly, number 9. It's upside down. Uh, Number 9, number 9, number 9. Butterfly is about the different chrysalis things, right? Butterfly is about transformation. So here's Raven saying there's a change in consciousness, and butterfly shows up talking about transformation. So the transformation deal with butterfly is, first you start out as an egg, and the egg is just a thought or an idea. Then there's the larvae stage. Do I need to make a decision stage? The third stage is when it's in the cocoon, is am I developing and doing something to make my idea a reality? And then the fourth stage in the transformation of butterfly is coming out of the chrysalis, and am I sharing my completed idea, spreading your wings and flying about? So the transformation of butterfly, that links real right in there with raven. So upside down, if you've drawn it reversed, your lesson is a simple one. That's always nice. There is a need for change in your life that you are not recognizing. Well, Raven just said there's going to be a change in consciousness. This could be a possible need for freedom, for a vacation, or for a new job. You may believe that change is too difficult, and you may rule it out to preserve the comfort of old habits, like old shoes. But in ruling out any possibility of change, you are saying that the courage of butterfly has been lost. Why does butterfly represent courage? Because there is a totally different world outside the cocoon, and you got to be brave in order to face it. So, raven, changing consciousness, butterfly saying, yeah, but don't be afraid of it, right? Take courage. All right. Eagle is number 1. It's upside down. And then eagle's been in the cards regular here lately. So, eagle is spirit. All right. So, eagle medicine is the power of the great spirit, the connection to the divine, both male and female. It is the ability to live in the realm of the spirit and also be able to stay connected and balanced with the realm of the earth. Eagle soars and is quick to observe the expansiveness within the overall pattern of life. So it's looking out across and it goes, it sees these things. So the feathers of eagles are very, very potent as far as medicine and medicine folk. If you've pulled this symbol, eagle is reminding you to take heart and to gather your courage. There's the word courage again. So, butterfly saying, get your courage up. And here's eagle saying, it's time to get your courage going. In being astute, you may recognize the places within your soul, your personality, and your emotions, or your psyche that need bolstering or refinement. So, but with the upside down card, it is, if you pulled eagle in the reverse, you have forgotten your power and you've forgotten your connectedness to the Great Spirit. So you have failed to recognize the light that is always available for those who seek illumination. The light is always available for those who seek illumination. So, have you lost your connectedness? So, Eagle says, take courage, reconnect to the Great Spirit. On some level, Eagle is telling you to seek higher ground in which to build your nest. Eagle's nest is high in the mountains where the air is clean and the movement free. It may be your time for a vision quest in order to commune with the Great Spirit. So the next one up is dog, which is loyalty, I believe, number 14. So interesting that the first three, yep, dog is loyalty. All of the Plains Indians tribes had dogs, and the dogs were animals that made sure that they could keep an eye on things around the tribe. And they even helped carry things and pull things and that type of thing. So dog has been considered the servant of humanity throughout history. If a person carries dog medicine, he or she is for serving others or humanity in some way. Dog was the servant soldier that guarded the tribes from surprise attacks. In examining dog medicine, you might find that you have found personal memories of owning and loving dogs in your own way. If dog has been, I'm sorry, dog medicine asks you to look at how readily your sense of loyalty is countermanded by your need for approval. In other words, you say, "Oh, I'm good with this, and I'm behind it 100%." But if you're going to go, yeah, but look, it's sort of like the same story that I read. It's not about boasting about how strong you were or how you outsmarted the eagle. No, so this is in the same way. So loyalty is loyalty to yourself and loyalty to what you believe and loyalty to the creator, the Great Spirit. The next one is turtle, upside down, number 10. So that's an interesting cards right there. And turtle is Mother Earth. So interesting Eagle saying get in touch with, you may have lost touch with with the creator and with the earth. Um, Turtle is the oldest symbol for the planet Earth. It is the personification of the goddess energy and the eternal mother from which our lives have evolved. We are born of the womb of the earth, and to her our souls will, and our bodies will return to in honoring the earth. Turtle has a shell which is similar to the protection that earth has employed for centuries as their body has been defiled. If you have chosen the turtle symbol, you are being asked to honor the creative source within you. So turtle's upside down, but you're asked to to honor the creative source within you. Now, the contrary is that Mother Earth is calling you to reconnect in some way, and so has Eagle told you to reconnect, and Dog is saying, be more faithful and understand, and then turtles reconnect. So it seems like that is uh, a a theme. The idea of turtle helplessly trying to right itself if it's upside down is one of those things, and so it's time to right yourself because the contrary turtle is that you're upside down. So now the next card up is the last one in the pile, and it's hummingbird number 44. And I think hummingbird is joy. I think. Yes. Hummingbird is joy. So hummingbird is associated with the ghost shirt religion. The song of hummingbird awakens the medicine in flowers. Hummer sings a vibration of pure joy. Flowers love the hummingbird because this brings about the reproduction of their own families. Hummingbird can fly in any direction and gets all over the place. Great Spirit created hummingbird to be slightly different from other winged creatures. Because of their magical qualities, hummingbird feathers have been used for making love charms for many centuries and etc. So it is the joy of hummingbird. So, but upside down, if contrary hummingbird is in your cards in any configuration, it speaks to you of matters of the heart. How or why has your heart center closed? Your heart center. Why is it closed? Have you done something callous to another, causing them to shut off the love or friendship they have felt for you? The contrary hummingbird may presage sorrow and the inability to see the many blessings we two-leggeds have been given, and the primordial beauty that surrounds us. If contrary hummingbird sings its forlong song, perhaps you should journey into your personal pain and know that your sorrow is your joy in another direction. So, how about that for some cards for tonight? That's some interesting stuff. So, be loyal to yourself and um, um, upside down turtle, right yourself. You know, Eagle is saying, um, reconnect. Uh oh. So how was that?
That was good. That was good.
And
That
we
was good.
still an hour and 54 minutes, so we're still under our 2 hour mark.
We are. We are. Doing good. Doing good. Chloe's seen a hummingbird. I planted a lot of flowers in front of my house for hummingbirds to come, and I haven't seen one yet. Anyway, thank you for showing up, Chloe. Anyway, Deborah L. Smith's in the house. Thank you for being here. Got a Witchy Moon, F. Kitty, Elderberry, Sunset Dreamer. Thank you all for showing up tonight. Listen to what we got to say. So,
what the spirits have to say,
That's right. That is
what
absolutely
do the spirits
right.
have to say?
Well, I hope everybody's having a good week. Don't forget to join me on Saturday night as we do another Saturday night Trinity of Truth show with all kinds of good stuff going on. Anyway, we'll be talking a little bit in Manly P. Hall, so catch that. That should be fun. So anyway, you going to have a show tonight?
Maybe. It always
maybe.
depends on if I can get the cell phone to log on. So
that's true. All right. Sounds good. I got to go to work tomorrow, so we're going to wrap this up. But I want to tell everybody, hey, it's summer. Go out and enjoy the weather. Go do things. Don't sit home. Listen to this show later if you have to, but but come back and listen. But the fact is go out and do real things. Talk about it in the winter when you can't go outside. Go out and look at the stars and enjoy yourself. Say hi to your neighbors. Start a campfire and just sit around and cook some marshmallows because it's that time of year. Sing some songs, get out the old guitar or harmonica or whatever you want to do, and just get together with some good friends and do something fun. And with that, everybody, remember, go out and be nice to your neighbor and be that frequency you want to receive, everybody. Love you all. Peace, everybody.
Cheers.